Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is April 9, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Nicholas Meyer. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Nick?
I'm calling in from distant Santa Monica.
How cool is that? The first question is what is the best thing for a human being?
What is the best thing for a human being?
Yeah,
Life?
great answer. That's Louis Buñuel. Long live the living. Life. I'm for that. I agree. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Probably reading.
Did you grow up a reader? One, because your parents told you to? Two, they did it as an example? Or three, on your own?
Well, I think it's a bit of two and three. My parents, particularly my father, read to me and very early on instilled in me a love of words, and that has yet to wear off. Um, I I don't know that I was very quick to read, and I certainly am not a fast reader, but I think on some level I'm happiest curled up somewhere with a book.
I agree. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think humans gather information originally for pragmatic reasons, to help them survive. You devise all kinds of systems based on what you can learn about the world in which we find ourselves. But I think of late, um, we have developed a kind of a self destructive habit of requiring information constantly, and it doesn't seem to make us happier or calmer. And it's certainly not about surviving anymore. It's partly a fear of being left out, of missing something, um, that other people are getting. um, I'm not sure that information is always the same and that it remains indisputably a good thing. Maybe it isn't always so good. Somebody said ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Really good, Nick. You really get what I'm after. And you're articulate. And I appreciate you listening. And because the next question is do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Well, as I said, I think I don't know whether it's innate or invented, but it certainly was essential in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
If you're gonna survive, you have to know that if you stick your hand in a fire, you're gonna get burned and it won't feel good and so forth. Um, I don't know. I think man, and I include women, human beings, are innately curious.
Yeah.
I think we are all curious about things. We want to see the eclipse. Um, we want to know the end of the story. We want to know if there are any shortcuts and so forth. I think that's innate. But I also think that the world in which we now find ourselves, in which information is being hurled at us, um, makes things seem essential that possibly are not.
Yeah. You're really anticipating a lot of directions we're going to. I appreciate it. Nick, do thoughts create emotions?
Well, I get confused about at this point the definition of the word thought or thoughts. I think experiences create emotions, possibly more than thoughts. How you react to what you experience, good experience, bad experience, joyous experience, painful experience. These are already emotional states that I seem to be describing. I don't know that thoughts create emotions, but I'd flip it and suggest that emotions might create thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, really good, because that's what it's me and you versus the wording on the question. So I really appreciate when people shift the verbs or the nouns that I use and open up the question wider. So this is a fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
Have time to think about it.
have time. Yeah. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
Well, a lot of what you're asking me is beyond my pay grade, that's for sure.
I
Um,
don't I
I,
don't think so. I've seen you in many interviews, Nick, and you play that way, but you all I'm after is your hunch or your guess. It's not, if one sounds like a neuroscientist question, you can guess it or hunch it. But if you say I don't know or pass, that's fine too. But I rather you just go for your hunch, you know.
well, all I can tell you about your question is that it's a question I've thought about for a long time without having reached a real conclusion as to
There you
whether it's possible to think without thoughts. I, um, I, I think it's possible to experience emotions without thought. I
yeah.
don't know whether it's possible to experience thoughts without language.
Without language, yeah, because there's a bumper sticker on my street on a car and it says, "Don't believe everything you think." And I say, well, you could say, "Don't believe everything you feel." You know,
Well, there is a great line in Hamlet: there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
that that's
So your
I'm
your
that's
your
pretty
brain
brilliant.
your brain will lie to you. That part I have found out. Your
Yeah,
brain will tell you that things are terrible when they may not be, or
yeah.
they will tell your brain will tell you that things are great when that's not true. Um, so sometimes when my brain is fucking with my head, I have to say there is nothing good or bad, but
Yeah.
thinking makes it so, and remind myself not to overly trust my brain.
We call that pull the wool over your own eyes.
Aha.
Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Nick, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, the question, I think language breaks down all the time. In fact, I could almost argue that words are useless to convey anything of significance.
Yeah.
Um, we falter when somebody dies and you have to write a condolence letter. How quickly we fall into cliches and bromides and deepest sympathies, and it was not really communicating what's important at that moment. Um, so when words fail me, I'm inclined to shut up. Um, I think my go-to place for a lot of things is music.
Oh, that's nice. Sweet.
And
Shut up. That's Frank Zappa had a great album. Shut up and play your guitar. Everybody complained about his words. So, but that's I have to tell you, one guy says, "What do you do when language breaks down?" He goes, "Group hug."
well, that's probably more useful. But I just yeah, I listen to a lot of music. I have a theory that the symphony orchestra is the greatest human achievement.
Very good.
A
That is beautiful.
gigantic
Yeah.
handmade machine with no intellectual content,
Yeah.
no single inventor, whose only purpose is making you happy.
Well, you
And
probably, yeah, you probably know Walter Pater said all art aspires to the condition of music.
music, you bet.
Yeah, that's like painting, poetry, architecture. Everything wishes it could be as cool as music.
I think that's correct.
Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Feeling, and that may be the problem.
Yeah. Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How can you turn your brain off when you're doing one of the most sensuous things your body? It's like people who meditate. They go, think about not thinking.
Well, that's like Benjamin Franklin once said he was going to make a list of virtues, and he first he put down on his first pass humility, and then he thought, oh, that's ridiculous. How could I'll wind up being proud of being humble?
I know you and me drop quotes. I want to have a drop quote-a-thon with you, but the goal is every quote we say, we then have to redo, like, and reboot it or reinvent it. I thought you'd get a kick out of this one. Is Robert Browning said, "Our reach should exceed our grasp."
Or what's a heaven for?
Or what is a heaven for? That's good. In McLuhan reworded it. He goes, our reach should exceed our grasp. Or what is a metaphor? Okay, 2 questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. 1, is thinking a function of the soul?
I think it depends what you're thinking about. Some
Wow.
thinking some things are a function of the soul, and some things are a function of other parts of you.
That is good. You know how many people, Nick, they go, well, it depends on how you define the soul. You shifted it. It depends on what you're thinking about. Okay, Turing number 2, can machines think?
It depends what you're asking them to think about. Machines can think of things that have been thought before,
Yeah.
but I don't think they can think of things that haven't been thought before.
It's good because I did a bonus one now. Turing also said, what we want is a machine that can learn from experience. Now, you brought up this word experience several times, and I appreciate it. I want to go into it, but I'm curious your thoughts on Turing's line. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. Do you think he's saying we as humanity in general, or we as these smart computer people?
Well, I'm in no position to sort of define what it was he was on about. I suspect he was talking individually or to a group of elite people, but I also think he somewhere had his eye on the collective. But these are just wild, uninformed guesses on my part.
Well, that's okay.
And what we're getting is, and we are getting machines that learn from experience, for better or worse. We're feeding them huge amounts of information, which counts in this context as a form of experience, and they're learning from what we are giving them to experience. I don't think there's any question that that's happening. Whether that's a good thing or not, that's something else.
Yeah. And Nick, since you brought up this word experience, here's a McLuhan line that I'm always curious what people think about. He said, everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. So you brought up the hand in the fire. I kind of think, and I'm not saying I know, what Marshall's trying to say maybe is If the kid comes in from the cold and the parent says, don't touch the stove, it will burn your hand. That's experience. If the parent goes, hey, let me teach you the dynamics of heat, you can get your hands really close to the stove and rub them and warm your hands up. That's understanding. So I think he's saying we should have understanding shaping our behavior, but more so experience shapes our behavior. Any thoughts on that?
I think experience tends to make a deeper impression on people. Experience is visceral, it's physical, it is non-intellectual,
Yeah,
and for those reasons, perhaps it's memorable.
yeah,
It doesn't always help um, if you are come home and you find that you're robbed and the robber is apprehended and he belongs to a certain ethnic group.
yeah,
Do you now irrationally begin to condemn or find yourself biased against that group because one member of that group burgled your house?
yeah,
That's experience, but it's not teaching you anything useful.
yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Happiness.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl said in his book Man's Search for Meaning that happiness doesn't tend to last, but meaning does.
I'm sure that's true. Or as my oldest daughter said, in life, there's going to be good times and bad times.
So what you raised a wise woman there, Nicholas.
Well, she's very wise. She's very wise.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
You got to run this one by me again.
Like, is consciousness there bubbling away? Are we more so detecting consciousness or creating consciousness?
Oh, geez, you got me. I don't. This is so far beyond what I can even understand. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm going to have to pass.
That's all right. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I think it's a tie.
There's a poet, Audre Lorde, who said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer said, oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
For taking apart a house?
Well, you can apply, as I said, you put the questions in the context you want. The basic question is, what tool do you gravitate towards? You can put a new in front of it if you want, and you can apply it to dismantling the master's house if you want.
Well, I'm a writer, and the tool that I find wonderful to use is a computer
Yeah.
because the business of writing, as I understand and experience it, is rewriting.
Yes.
And the computer has made rewriting much easier just from a physical standpoint. As a young man, many years ago, you wanted to rewrite, you had to get the whiteout, you had to get the scissors, you had to get the scotch tape. And if you were not a perfectionist by temperament, you may say, oh, fuck it, leave the comma where it was. And or the typo, or wait, you had a better idea to put in there, but no, it's too much work. But because of computers and how easy they make it to
Yeah.
change your mind, to add, subtract, to elaborate, to edit, I enjoy the process of writing a great deal more, and I can be much more of a perfectionist than I ever could when I was writing A by hand or B using a Smith Corona portable electric.
Yeah. Well done. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
The ending of the world before I wake up.
McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Wow, I have to pass because I don't really understand about what you're saying.
Yeah, well, do you think artists have moral obligation?
I think everybody has moral obligation.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm more afraid of bad ideas.
Very good. That's a good word change there. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yes, very easily. Because I once opened a novel by writing down what was my earliest memory. And my earliest memory is of the eyes of my cat in the dark in my room when I was a baby. And I just looked and I saw those glowing eyes in the dark.
Beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, that I have to say I've given a good deal of thought about. I happen to have what many people consider a very, very good memory. I remember a lot. And the question I ask myself, which I guess you're posing, is do I wish that I didn't always remember as much as I do?
Yeah.
Because you not only remember things that are handy to know, or fun to know, or useful to know, but you also sometimes remember things that are excruciating to remember. And so I'm of two minds. I'm proud of my memory, which is sort of ridiculous because I don't know, I had nothing to do with why it's a good memory. This is something in DNA or something that I have a good memory. So being proud of it is like Ben Franklin being proud of being humble. It's a little silly. Um, on the other hand, there have been times in my life when I wished I didn't remember so much.
Yeah. I agree. I go through that. Incredible. So please tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Well, the first and biggest impact on me was my father, who, to my way of thinking, was a most remarkable man. He was ferociously intelligent. He was amazingly cultivated. He was charismatic, and he was learned and passed on his joy of learning and what he used to call the goodies of life. Um, he introduced me to literature, to music. I mean, I think I learned Mozart from him. I learned Sherlock Holmes from him. I learned all kinds of things from this very cultivated, civilized, wide ranging person, um, and endlessly curious about the world in which he found himself. And he passed a lot of that curiosity or the results of that curiosity on to me. A person outside my family, there's a long, long list of teachers, and teachers in the formal professional sense, and teachers as in mentors. Um, they're endless, and many of them are artists. I suppose I would say Shakespeare is a big teacher, but so was Daniel Ellsberg. So was a teacher I had, and who literally was a teacher in, I think, junior high or first year of high school, a woman named Madeline Gramay, um, who these were life changing people.
Yeah. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No.
Do you pray?
Yes, but I don't know to whom.
Very good. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
What makes you think that after I die, I will encounter God and not before?
That is I've never had that response. I don't. I welcome anything. This is wide open.
If I meet up with God, I want him to say I'm sorry.
I get that answer sometimes. That's very good. Yes. Okay. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Evil people exist.
The real hidden question here, Nick, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll open it up. The few thinkers, like Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai: keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think you should acknowledge who your enemies are, but I also think you have to define who your enemy is. What makes an enemy? Um, because there are different kinds of enemies.
Yeah.
I think enemies who, um, are theoretical enemies, people, you know, an enemy is someone coming at you with a gun. That's one kind of enemy, which not acknowledging them doesn't going to do much. You better shoot first and ask questions later. But there are all kinds of enemies, um, and so there have to be all kinds of responses. Looking for blanket answers to some of the questions that you're posing
Yeah.
doesn't work for me, because
Totally.
I wish life were simpler,
Yeah.
and that there were just, Einstein's string theory, one rule that covers everything. But I don't think there is.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely not. I just use, I'm not out to, like some people say, did you answer the question? I'm not after answering question. After stories, anecdotes, in in any kind of prompt to a new idea. Because here's Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. In fact, Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts again, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Well, I'll put the case where it works, and I can probably put the case where it doesn't work.
Thanks. Good.
If
Yes.
if you if somebody is a murderer, and this is the hypothetical, and for a fact it's not about reasonable doubt, this guy did this or this woman did this, then if you take that person's life, they are not going to murder again. You've stopped it. Is that, you know but it's predicated on this rather loose idea that you know for a fact that they did it. And we all know how many innocent people have been executed for crimes that turns out they didn't commit.
Yeah.
So it makes you, you know, hesitant to cast that lethal stone.
Right. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, the bigger question, which I do preoccupy myself with, is
Yeah.
what is the purpose of art?
Yeah.
And art can have many purposes. Tolstoy said, "The purpose of art is to teach you to love life."
Yeah.
But art could also teach you to escape life.
Yeah.
It could teach or could help you to endure life. Art could also change your view of life. So, art, it seems to me, and I include film or painting or music, these have many potential uses and advantages. And it's also true that sometimes when you are in an objective situation, it's easier to contemplate what's going on than it is if you're in the middle of it. So when you contrasted being in a theater and looking at a play with being in life and experiencing life as it's unfolding, it may be on occasion, maybe more than one occasion, more useful, more calming, more purgative, to experience life as distilled through art
Yeah.
than it is to have to muddle through without any guidance, help. Yeah, like
Yeah, that
that.
was good, Nick. I've heard you say this, inquiring about art, and it's one of the things that really occupies me a lot too. And there's just two quotes about art, just your reaction, no big deal. Mike Kelly, the artist, said, "Art is making your problems other people's problems."
Sometimes.
Yeah. Fanny Howe, the poet, said, "The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't."
I I think the first half of it is Tolstoy's
Right,
line.
right.
I don't think the purpose of art ought to be, could be anything,
Yeah,
whatever you want. Uh, I don't I don't want art that says to people, you know, you're better off putting a bullet in your head. I don't think
yeah.
that's very helpful art.
Yeah, McLuhan and Warhol both said art is anything you can get away with. And my friend said, "That sounds like Trump," and it's like, ay, ay, ay. So walk us through just briefly, Nick, your tipping point. When did you grow up being a reader? When did you go, that's what I want to pursue? I want to write.
I started writing when I was about 5 years old. And I started telling my father stories. And by the way, telling stories is all I know how to do.
Yeah,
I can't do anything else. Renoir said, "I'm a happy man. I can do nothing but paint."
yeah,
Um, and so um, I started telling my father stories, and he would write them down for me. And then he said, "Listen, I'm tired of this. You better write your own stories."
yeah,
And so from then on, I was always writing. People said, "When did you decide to become a writer?" And I said, "I never decided any such thing. I
yeah.
still haven't decided. It's just something that I do. It's my safe place
Right.
is words." And when I decided to be a filmmaker, it was pretty easy to describe the stages. We didn't have a TV when I was growing up, not because we couldn't afford one, we just didn't have one. And so I was taken to the movies when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I'd never been to a movie. And I ran out of the movie absolutely terrified, screaming in fear. And then I fell in love with not only movies, but with that movie and that actor. And according to my dad, the shrink, he said what you had was what's known as a counterphobic experience. And counterphobia is where the object feared becomes the object loved. And
Yeah.
you just can't get enough of it. And from there, I went on to be fascinated with movies in general. And then we did get a television, and all I did was watch movies instead of doing homework. And then I was taken when I was 11. I was taken for my birthday to see the Mike Todd movie of Around the World in 80 Days. And I was already by 11 a Sherlock Holmes fan, an Alexandre Dumas fan, and a Jules Verne fan. So 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Around the World. I already knew this stuff.
Yeah.
And I had a religious experience watching this movie. And there was a program for $2 that came in a little booklet that you could buy in the theater, and was all articles about how they made the movie, which was such a big, expensive movie. And one article had two headlines on it. The first headline was, "You too can make a motion picture."
Wow.
And the second headline was, "No previous experience necessary." And this was because Mike Todd, who was a Broadway producer, had never produced a movie.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a sarcastic article. All you need is $6 million and 14,000 people in 12 countries, and you're in. But as age 11, I didn't get the sarcasm. All I got was, "You too can make a motion picture. No previous experience necessary." So I said to my father, "I want to make a movie, and you have to help." And we have an 8mm wind up camera.
Yeah.
And of course, not being the sharpest knife in the drawer, I wanted to make the movie I had just seen. I wanted to be Phileas Fogg.
Yeah.
And my father, with a sort of suspicious alacrity, fell in with this plan right away. And we spent the next 5 years
Wow.
on weekends, on school vacations, on summer holidays, shooting an all kids version of Around the World in 80 Days, which was almost an hour by the time it was edited and finished. And so, yeah,
I hope that's an extra on one of your DVDs. Can we ever see that?
that's a very good question, putting as an extra. I do have it. The thing, it's been through a lot of iterations that maybe haven't done it so much good. The 8mm thing, eventually I blew it up to 16mm, and it
Yeah.
lost some of its clarity. And
Yeah.
then I had it transferred to DVD.
Yeah.
It's at this point, a lot of people loved it at the time. Boy, it was popular, and we used to rent it out at parties and got more banged up doing that. But your idea of putting it as an extra is hilarious. That's
Oh yeah.
wonderful.
Oh yeah. It's so you win a lot of places there is really enjoyable. Thank you. But I just wanted to go back to that first Age 7 movie. What was the title of that first movie?
The Beggar's Opera.
Oh, The Beggar's Opera. Good. Yeah.
It was directed by a 23-year-old Peter Brook, and it
Yeah.
starred Laurence Olivier, Dorothy Tootin, Hugh Griffith, Stanley Holloway, and Daphne Anderson. And there was a woman in it who plays Jenny Diver named Yvonne Furneaux, who was beyond beautiful. If you're 7, and I like girls, and I like this girl a lot. She plays Marcello Mastroianni's plain wife in Dolce Vita, I believe,
Yeah.
Yvonne Furneaux. But she was very glamorous in The Beggar's Opera. Very.
Beautiful. Nick, I'm curious about, we're researching archive. You know, the word archive, 1400s means keep safe, free from harm. 1600s, it's what we know it as, record preserved as evidence. And the basic question is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive? Because, you know, the point of life, and if you follow Eastern philosophy, is to be here now, live in the moment. Wyndham Lewis says artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. But we all know the services of archiving, historical research. But why do we have to keep all this stuff if we're trying to live in the moment? Is this need or want to archive more innate or more invented?
Well, for me, I definitely want to leave a record that I was here.
Yeah.
Um, and not just the record of my own work, but a record of my tastes, the books that I collected, the paintings that I acquired or bought or whatever. The idea of going into a void and just disappearing, which I will do, bothers me. And I wish that, particularly, I suppose, for my kids, that they have some record of who their father or who their grandfather was. In my family, we're very big on keeping track of documents and records. The University of Iowa has my collected papers.
Oh,
The rest,
good. You have a plan. Yeah. So your original 8 millimeter video, a film is saved, or did you ditch that after you digitized it?
oh, I don't know if I have the actual film, but I do have it on DVD.
Yeah, because
And
see, digital doesn't necessarily last. We want to, the main archivists say always save the master. But that's good. You have a University of Iowa. That's very important to have that. So let's go into this. I think it's really concerns me with your great work of art. Your films have been a big impact on me. A screenwriting teacher told me great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making a Nick Meyer film or writing it, making it?
whether we're talking about film or books, because I also write books,
Books and film. Yeah, you can separate them if you want. Yeah.
no, put them together.
Yeah.
I think artists are people who put messages in bottles.
Yeah.
When it's done, you throw the bottle out into the wide world and hope that somebody will find it, hope that it'll be intact,
Yeah.
hope that they can pop the cork and look at what it is that you put in there.
Yeah.
But you are not going to be looking over their shoulder when they do and
Yeah.
correcting their interpretation. No, that's not gum, that's gun, and so forth.
Yeah.
People will make of it what they will, or they won't. They'll love it, they'll hate it, they'll find insights in it, or they won't. Um, and I think that whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's for sure an inevitable thing. And so I have a kind of philosophic attitude toward what people think about my creations. I am not the answer at the back of a book of math equations, you know, to say, no, you're right, you're wrong. That is what I intended. No, it isn't what I'm intended. When people say to me, why does Khan wear only one glove? I go, well, why do you think he wears only one glove? Um, or somebody asked Balanchine what a certain ballet of his was about.
Yeah,
And he said, that's none of my business.
that's good. None of my business. Yeah. But there is something curious going on here. D.W. Griffith 100 years ago said in 2024, that's the year we're living in, cinema will end warfare. Yeah, right. Okay. Sidney Lumet says films can't do diddly squat, but it ain't going to keep me from trying. I remember how important it was to watch The Day After on TV with a lot of people. You know,
150 million.
a lot of people. This was an amazing event in many people's lives. And as it says in your Wikipedia, Reagan said, not on my watch. And it kind of said, well, this film had an impact. Jean-Luc Godard told Michael Moore when he released a 9/11 film at Cannes, your film's going to help Bush get elected. Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. So I know what you're saying, that once the artist creates their art, it's not theirs, it's the user. McLuhan updated medium as a massage, the user is the content. So, and it even goes to, I think what you say about art is the poet Auden. The mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. But I think
there's a lot of truth to that, I think.
yeah, but I think there is something in you that you wanted to say with The Day After, and you accomplished it to an extent. And we know the bad guys used it to their liking, and the good guys used it to their liking.
Yeah,
But
but at the end of the day after did accomplish something. It changed Ronald Reagan's mind about a winnable nuclear war. It sent him to Reykjavik, where he signed the Intermediate Missile Range Treaty with Gorbachev, which, as Daniel Ellsberg explained to me, is the only treaty that ever resulted in the physical dismantling of nuclear weapons. And of course, the pussy grabber in chief has recently walked out of that treaty. But for the 30 years since I made the movie, I would like to think, and I think I'm generally correct in thinking, The Day After staved off to a fairly substantial degree the possibility of us annihilating ourselves, which we seem intent on doing. And, absolutely talking about history and art and archives, somebody said, George Santayana, those who do not learn the lessons that history teaches are condemned to repeat those lessons. If Hitler had paid a little more attention to Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia, maybe he wouldn't have lost World War II. But the problem is we ignore the lessons that history teaches. History is only one generation deep. If you haven't lived through it, or maybe told your kid about it, that's it. By the next generation, I was listening to NPR on my way over here today, and they were talking to Rwandans who were too young to have lived through the genocide in Rwanda, and how difficult it is for them to contemplate and understand, to absorb, let alone learn lessons from what happened before they were born.
Yeah.
And when the Allies entered Dachau, and they saw what the Germans had done, what the concentration camp was, they summoned the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, and they said, General, you got to see this. And he said, I'm very busy. And somebody said, General, you got to see this. And he came and he made a couple of decisions, but I'll only tell you about one. He said, I want this camp, I want everything here photographed up the wazoo. I want it photographed in color. I want it photographed in black and white. I want still pictures. I want moving pictures. And I'll tell you why. Because in 50 years or 100, I don't remember what he said, people will deny this ever happened. Right now, people are denying that January 6th ever happened.
Yeah.
Nobody tried to take over the United States government. Nobody tried to storm the Capitol. Nobody put their feet up on the desk, and so on and so on and so forth. People will deny.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Louis Buñuel saying, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." There's a lot of gray in there, and most people go, "That's correct." And I go, one guy finally says, "Nope, that's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it." So I morphed it into the question. The cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination. Why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important?
Destination is a great motivator. I speak from experience. I know I have to take a walk every day. It's part of my exercise, but I do it better if I'm on my way to the grocery store and I have to pick up a carton of Earth Balance. I just, it's a motivator. And I
That's how
thought,
I, yeah,
what?
that's how I operate. I says, well, if I'm going to take a bike ride, it might as well be to the library or the store to do an errand. And I agree with you. But it's also, there's the people who changed the world a lot in the 20s in Paris were flaneurs, and they psychogeography, they just sort of wandered aimlessly. And as Joyce put it, they had an epiphany in everydayness.
Yeah, I think the problem is or at least the problem for me, is how much do you believe about what people say or think about themselves and their own actions? Um, when these flaneurs were wandering around Paris, were they really wandering aimlessly, or were they on their way to hoping to get laid, or
Yeah.
or looking at things that endlessly teased them? That's not an aimless flaneuring is, well, I'm getting into trouble here. I just know it. But um, Paris is very confusing because once you're there, motivation goes right out the window. You just want to find
Well, I
ways
like
to
what you're saying,
ways
Nick.
to stay there.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Nick, because someone recently said, well, Frederick Wiseman's a flaneur. He picks a subject and then wanders around. But, here's Shelby Foote, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. A fact is not a truth until you love it.
I love the sentence. I'm not sure what it's.
Right.
Yeah. Or John Adams said, "Facts are stubborn things." Um, uh, and I always want to sort of turn things like that around. A truth um, is not a fact until you believe it.
Well, that's what I like to do is reinvent aphorisms. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants and looking a little further, as Echo said. But this is good because I'm curious. You've touched on this, the difference between science and art. And one person said science uncovers facts that can be interpreted many different ways. What's talk about the difference between science and art? Is there a difference, or are they the same?
Well, Freud said about art, he said, psychoanalysis must throw up its hands in the face of art. What the artist knows by intuition, the scientist will take a long time plodding and measuring in order to figure out the same thing. If you read Billy Budd, that's the classic case study of a stutterer. But Melville didn't know anything about classic case studies. He just, intuited it or witnessed it. By the same token, at the end of A Tale of Two Cities, Madame Defarge shows up at the Darnay house to find out why the Darnay family was not at his execution, not realizing that the family has fled. leaving behind in the empty house only the English governess, Miss Pross. And Miss Pross is determined to prevent Madame Defarge, whose language she cannot speak, from searching the house. She doesn't want her to search the house. Madame Defarge is intent on searching the house. And eventually, these women start wrestling with each other to the death. I mean, literally, physically fighting. And Madame Defarge pulls a pistol out. And as they struggle for the gun, it goes off. And Dickens says, the report of that gun was the last sound Miss Pross ever heard.
Yeah.
She's alive. Madame Defarge is dead. But Miss Pross is permanently deaf. That's a description of hysterical deafness.
Yeah.
It's not written by a scientist. It's intuited by
Yeah.
an artist. And so I think art and science may approach similar subjects, but they approach them in very different ways. Um, and I would argue that we need both.
Yeah.
And both are tricky. Are tricky. Art
Very.
is tricky. Science is tricky. Life is tricky.
It's really good because you touched on something I want to go into for a second here. And two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self expression. The jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Say that again.
Yeah, is art making, filmmaking, writing more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies and cultures are dominant?
This is going to be particularly shallow, but I don't think it's a question that interests me very much.
Yeah.
I'm not what you'd call a deep thinker. I'm a very big on experiencing things. I'm a sensualist. I want to read every book, see every movie, date every girl, whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I spend a lot of time in that kind of introspection, particularly about my work.
Yeah.
John le Carre said, all I know is I'm happy when I write and I'm not happy when I'm not writing.
Yeah.
And that's about as far as I get.
Well, no, that's good, Nick. But the basic question is to be bringing up Freud. Can art making, writing be egoless?
I don't care.
Okay. A poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
English.
It's more like metaphorical. What form is your inner consciousness in?
I don't know. I've never seen it.
It's one of my favorite answers. Abigail Childs, one of the great filmmakers in New York, says, I don't know. I wish I knew. So McLuhan also says that everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera extends our eyelid, and maybe non-tangible like philosophy or religion extends our consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's the pen or a keyboard, what humanness does it extend for you?
I try to tell stories that do a number of things. I want to move people, first of all. I want to make them laugh or cry because I think those emotions are sort of good for you and can bring people together.
Yes.
I get very worried about everybody walking around with earbuds or listening to their own channel. I think one of the things that I love about theater, and I don't care whether it's a movie theater, an opera theater, a ballet theater, a play theater, is the idea of bringing people who don't know each other at all together to experience collectively something that makes them laugh or cry.
Yeah.
That you're sitting in the dark and you're laughing with a bunch of people, you don't know them, they don't know you, but they'll always be part of that experience. That day, that laughter, those tears. And afterwards, if you've experienced emotionally the work of art, the painting, the movie, the piece of music, if you find yourself thinking then about what it was that that touched you, that moved you, then that sort of completes the
Yeah.
circle for me. That's what I want to do with my work. Along the way, I'd like to educate people. I'd like to inform them. I'd like to provoke them. But Joseph Conrad said, "My aim above all is to make you see."
Yeah. I love that, and really well articulated, because I was curious. I spoke with Michael Apted 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video makers feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s with MTV, to the extent where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. And what Michael Apted told me is, said, because we've learned to take in information faster. And
I think there's truth in that.
I asked the question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Well, I think it's a physical truth that audiences have learned to take in information faster. They've also learned to take it in more slowly. Michael Apted, I should say, directed one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
So I'm just
What title is that, Nick?
Enigma.
Yeah, but the real hidden question there, Nick, is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Depends on the human.
Yeah.
Napoleon was very good at multitasking. He had about 10 secretaries and he could walk up and down and dictate letters and never lose his place in where he was. That's multitasking. He also said one of my favorite things. Somebody recommended a general to Napoleon and said, this guy's a very good general. And Napoleon said, I know he's good, but is he lucky?
Yeah. Okay, well that's perfect. You have ESP. You've
I think,
accomplished you've accomplished a lot. How do you
well,
rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
the longest silence since the burglar told Jack Benny on the radio, your money or your life.
Brilliant.
He said, I'm thinking. Um, luck, skill, or ambition?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question, and that hence my very, very long pause as we reach the end of this conversation, which I've greatly enjoyed. Um, I don't know. Skill is very important. Talent,
Yes.
whatever you want. But a lot of talented people who are unlucky, their talent doesn't find expression, or people don't learn about it, or whatever. And then, and ambition is part of it. I think you have to work hard. Although there are people, to whom things came very easily. But you take the case of Mozart, who had more talent than anybody, And for a while, he was very, very lucky. He certainly didn't lack for ambition. He was very ambitious. Um, but his luck ran out. So his ambition and his talent didn't save him from a pauper's grave.
Yeah.
So I think luck is right up there.
Well, Nick, it's funny because this is one of those questions I have morphed over my 40 years of interviewing, because it used to be, is ambition based more on fear or joy? And 80% of people would say fear. And then Friedkin came out with his book a couple years ago, and he says, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition.
He
So,
and I knew Billy, we
yeah,
were friends, and I was a fan and an admirer,
yeah,
and we switched memoirs. He said,
yeah.
"I want to read yours, you read mine," and then he called me up and he said, "Yours is better. I hate you."
You mean before they were published or after?
No, no, after.
After published, yeah. Well, I asked for 90 minutes, but we have 20 more minutes. Can you go 20 more or what?
I can go 10.
Okay, 10 more. Thank you for telling me. So, what was the motive of the cave artist? Your guess or your hunch?
Well, I love cave art. I'm fascinated by it. And I think there were several motives. Curiosity to begin with.
Yeah,
What happens if I take my hand that has mud on it and push it on the wall, and then I see an impression of my hand, my fingers? Um, and it sort of, I think, begins with curiosity. And then once you are sort of excited and intrigued by that result, you want to repeat it.
yeah,
And then you want to vary it. And then at a certain point, you say, well, what happens if instead of using my hand, I just use my finger and trace something? And you can see in these cave paintings. Um, and I always, when I was teaching film at a certain point, I always began by showing these cave paintings. What do you see? What's the story? Because there are stories
yeah,
that you can see are happening. The one is that of an animal that's clearly injured
yeah,
and lying on its side, and another animal is standing over it in a sort of sympathetic um, pose. That's a story. That's the beginning of movies. That's the beginning of the Iliad. Whatever. It starts there, and some of it is curiosity that is morphing into skill and being refined. In the beginning of Greek tragedy, there were two actors. There was the protagonist and the antagonist. The word agon is buried in the middle of it. The argument, the debate, the drama. The first actor being the protagonist, the second actor being the antagonist. And then along comes Sophocles and puts in a third actor, and so forth.
yeah,
So, somebody uh, stumbles on something accidentally, an animal skin that is stretched tight over something. You bang on it and you get a drum. And the next thing is, what kind of things can you do with this drum? Well, you can
yeah,
drum fast, you can drum slow, and then somebody says, "How about another drum?" Now, and so forth. And that's and somehow that led to the symphony orchestra.
yeah.
Somehow that led to an orchestra.
It sounds like it led to that great skit by Spike Jones where he has the two cavemen banging on rocks. But you brought up story, and Nick, I wonder, Hollis Frampton, experimental filmmaker, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die.
Say
Can
that
you?
again. Say it again.
Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. My question is, can you forget to die?
Well, it's on my list.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
It's a very good question. It supposes that it's possible to turn a weakness into a strength.
Exactly.
I can tell you what was a weakness that I learned to overcome, if that means turning it into a strength.
Yeah.
And that is, as a young man, I didn't listen.
Yeah.
I was not good at listening. I was too busy showing off and talking about myself. And I found that I made a lot more friends and influenced a lot more people if I would just shut the fuck up and listen.
There you go. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
It's interesting. As a 12-year-old, I was a very unhappy child. And I had lots of reasons to be unhappy. My mother was dying of cancer. I was an ignominious failure in school. I guess if I would have said anything, I would have said, "This too shall pass." I wouldn't have believed it, but and I had people say things like that to me. But
Yeah.
if you had told me when I became fixated on the Beggar's Opera and Laurence Olivier became my idol, especially when I saw the movie that I thought was called Henry V. I thought it was Henry V. And that was a life-changing experience. That introduced Shakespeare into my life and changed everything.
Yeah.
And if you had said to me, age 8 years old, whatever it was, one day, this man, the man that you're fixated on in the movies, is going to be saying your dialogue.
Yeah.
He's going to speak. Well, you wouldn't have. That was ridiculous.
Amazing.
That wasn't going to. I didn't even know. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, what's a question that remains unresolved for you?
What is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
And and I think I know the answer, which makes me crazy. And that is that there is no meaning.
That's, the guy goes to the guru and he says, "What's the best question I can ask you?" And the guru goes, "The one you just asked me." Well, Nick, how has making films, especially writing, how has writing shaped your behavior?
Well, it keeps me at home.
There you go. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I don't see a cultural shift that inspires me. I see a cultural shift that terrifies me, and I can give it to you in, very short order. One word:
Yeah.
illiteracy.
Yeah.
We
Well,
no longer educate ourselves. Nobody knows how to read. Nobody knows how to talk. Nobody knows how to think.
yeah.
We don't teach civics classes anymore. Why is that?
Yeah.
We don't teach grammar. Why is that?
Yeah. Yeah, media literacy is what I've been on campaign as a media ecologist my whole life, is learning how to read between the lines, let alone read.
How about the lines?
How about the lines? Yeah. It's like Mallarmé said, everything will end up in a book, and it probably will. So, Nick, what gives you the most optimism?
Art gives me the most optimism. Beauty gives me the most optimism. Kindness gives me the most optimism. Those are the things that make me optimistic to the degree that I am optimistic.
Three beautiful words. You know, the first question was, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he said, other people. It's sure been great spending this time with another person, especially because it was you, Nick. I really appreciate your time and energy. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. It was a treat. You asked some very hard questions.
Well, it was engaging how you have done films that have made an impact, because it's something that, you know, I've studied. You know, probably know Jeremy Kagan. We've talked about this, how films like Battle of Algiers was used by the good guys and the bad guys. So it was like, here's an idea, process it. You know, I just interviewed John Ells, who made Day After Trinity, you know, like the real Oppenheimer film, and the same thing. The good guys used it and the bad guys used it. So it's an amazing thing when your film can actually have an impact that was documented. Like The Day After, I mean, I remember the day when it shook my brain and made me think, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends, Nick, and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.